My name's Alex, and this is the second part of our episode on Ecofascism. We really appreciate all the support you've given us so far. You can support us financially on Patreon at patreon.com/12Rules for what, and you can give as little as $2 a month, which is not that much at all. And you totally should, because with more money we can do more research, spend more time on booking guests and making the show better. If you like the show, then please do retweet, support, all that good stuff. And also, if you're on iTunes, give us that sick review, 5 stars, because for some reason it helps algorithmically. We are also pleased to say we're now part of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts. We will be running trailer for another show on the Channel Zero network sometime in the show. Make sure you check them all out. They're all sick. I'm again joined by Fawn from Green Anti-Capitalist Front. Welcome. So to start us off, for like the second part, I kind of want to shift our focus a little bit. In the first episode we talked about ecofascism, how it worked a little bit, and I kind of want to talk about like an eco-antifascism and what that would look like. And the way I see it, I think there's kind of 2 ways this kind of manifests. And one is like an anti-fascist movement that operates within the green movement and fights against reactionary thinking, reactionary politics. And then there's a more expansive version of eco-antifascism which considers the climate crisis as affecting fascist politics and tries to think about strategies which can counter that and be effective in a future environment in which there's climate migration, more heavily policed borders, more authoritarian regimes. What kind of thoughts do you have about like an eco-antifascism? Do you think it's a worthwhile project, or do you think I'm backing up the wrong tree?
I think as far as anti-fascism goes, like you say, there are 2 different attempts, 2 different sort of entry points you can make. You can either go via some overarching philosophy that is both green and anti-fascist, or you can attempt to anti-fascistize the already green currents in the sort of activist sphere. From experience and from the history of ecological movements, it's quite important to have a green movement that is anti-fascist from the start, as opposed to attempting to reform green or ecological-based thinkers. So, for example, the deep ecology movement has been significantly co-opted by National Socialists because it in itself isn't explicitly anti-fascist, and it provides to them a reasonable justification for fascism to preserve the sanctity of all the individual creatures and lives. And if that requires the preservation of some constructed natural order where white Europeans are at the top, then that's how it's got to be. And that's why that kind of thinking is dangerous, because as much as it's nice to have a philosophy that starts from as equalizing and egalitarian principles as deep ecology does, it doesn't have any sort of materialist analysis built into it. Whereas a more stronger green philosophy, but again quite out there, such as primitivism, is materialist and has built into it a sort of anti-capitalist, anti-fascist critique that isn't a sort of third positionist critique, which is possible within the framework of deep ecology.
Perhaps we need to like kind of get ourselves on a level about what we mean when we're talking about eco-fascism in order to talk about eco-antifascism. So could you give us I know you've got it, so I don't know why I'm asking this question, but a sick quirk on what eco-fascism is.
I can give you a sick quote.
Amazing.
So this one is from Michael E. Zimmerman. And in his text, he defines ecofascism as a totalitarian government that requires individuals to sacrifice their interests to the well-being and glory of the, quote, land, unquote, understood as the splendid web of life or the organic whole of nature, including peoples and their states. The land acquires mystical properties as the sacred source and absolute measure for all things. Polluting the land, either by toxins or by admitting the wrong kind of immigrants, not only threatens the state's stability and security, but also affronts the sacred natural order itself. Even though the web of life supposedly admits no hierarchies, ecofascism requires leaders who enforce natural principles against selfish, i.e. unnatural, individuals and peoples. militarism, expansionism, and possibly racism are required to defend the land, whether that's fatherland, Mother Earth, or Gaia, from those who disrespect the land, including both industrialized countries and overpopulated developing nations. Consistent with Darwinist principles, the eco-fascist state will succeed in the struggle for survival because such a state is more adaptive to, that is, respectful of, the environment, now glorified as the sacred web of life.
You can see a lot of these kind of reactionary politics generalized throughout like kind of our mainstream popular culture, I feel. You have like characters like Chris Packham, BBC personality who presents Springwatch, and like people like David Attenborough, on the sly or sometimes not so on the sly, kind of in these very reactionary ideas like Malthusianism, which we talked about last episode. Overpopulation is like a problem. And in some cases that's expected because it's coming from like a liberal place of not questioning capitalism. Just thinking about like popular like climate education, science education, how does that kind of like low level politics affect eco-fascist thinking?
As in, how does the underlying current of liberal analysis that is taught to people in schools affect how eco-fascists
Not eco-fascists
exist?
themselves, but like a generalized kind of eco-fascist thinking within the populace.
Okay, yeah. So we talk about Britain as being a liberal democracy, and similar for other Western countries like Sweden or Norway or France or the US, these large imperialist powers. And within those countries, the rhetoric of borders isn't challenged. It's seen as, it's unfortunate that people are, stopped at borders, but it's not. But it's what has to happen. We have to enforce some kind of law, otherwise everything will be anarchic. And there is, there's no challenge to capitalism. It sort of says liberalism has built into it this idea that, if people are free to make choices, then capitalism is ethical because you're free to sell your labor. And it never bothers to analyze why certain people may be only able to sell their labor sort of in the sense that Engels talked about in sort of wage slavery, as opposed to freely giving away your labor to help a project. So there isn't any critique of the mode of production that we have. There's no critique of why there is excessive production, why imperialism is necessary. Again, because if you're in the UK, you don't see imperialism. It's not part of your day-to-day life. And all these things are aspects of eco-fascism in themselves, i.e. as far as productionism, borders, they just are amped up. So if you provide a liberal country with this sort of death cult style rhetoric about the planet will die any second now and there is nothing we can do except buy plastic straws, people who haven't been raised with any kind of other political analysis other than the one that's sort of already present in society, are just going to default to the ideas that have served their country so far. And if your country relies on closed borders and a strong state like the US does or like the UK does, then you say, well, okay, let's tighten those controls and ensure that that we protect the environment and that the whales are okay because we're only fishing X, Y, and Z quotas. But unfortunately, that isn't actually a critique. That's just let's strengthen the state and strengthen the hierarchies we've already got built into it, ignoring the material realities of capitalism, whether that's the imperialist aspect, the colonialist aspect, any other aspect outside of state man good. So it's kind of necessary for people to be taught that capitalism isn't the be-all end-all, and that putting all your faith in it is dangerous, because once it starts decaying and we have the problems that we have with the environment, and all of a sudden the world is really being killed. It's not just, it's not, dead as we speak, but it is being killed. And if your solution is just to do liberalism harder and greener, then maybe you haven't thought through that very much, and you'll get fascism.
Yeah, I guess the bourgeois state as like an instrument of good that can rein in the evil corporations, when really the bourgeois state is there to support and nurture and protect the evil corporations. There's a fundamental contradiction going
Yeah.
on right here. Yeah,
There's a conflict of interest there.
really. So, do you think like a more materialist, a more communist, anarchist form of popular science education would be able to stop this kind of general thinking? Do you think it's already set in, or and if so, if you think it would be a positive project to have, how could we actualize this in like a kind of popular mass way?
I think there is real capacity within science education and STEM, well, just education in general, to disavow the sort of liberal individualist style of science that
I guess like STEM's been left to the right for so long that no one's been contesting these kind of things really ever. It's like the division between liberal humanities, liberal arts, and materialist STEM, but it's like right wing.
No, but you don't understand. It's pragmatic.
Okay.
You have to drone strike people, and we have to have better drones. And where else than universities to build better drones? But there is a meaningful platform sort of to combat this right wing sort of creep within the sciences.
Or hegemony even.
Yeah, yeah, hegemony. So a lot of the research funding will come from corporations, and it's maybe necessary to think about why a certain corporation is paying for a PhD position, or why a certain corporation is willing to pay researchers to research into harmless proximity sensors or harmless drone technology. And at the time when you're doing that research, it just does seem like you are applying your degree or applying your A-levels or applying, this engineering that you've maybe trained up in an apprenticeship. But that's because it's not questioned that these corporations have the interests of humans at heart, that these corporations are progressive, when in reality, if you're doing an internship at somewhere like BAE or Lockheed Martin, then what you're actually doing is contributing to imperialism in a very direct way. So it should be part of the science curriculum to understand the effects of science and how it's used, and how that science is, the positivism that science is based on is an Enlightenment revelation. It is, science is and always will be a cultural phenomenon, as well as being a sort of, to most scientists' mind, it's a very objective thing. You just find out what the truths of the universe are, but you also have to be aware that in a society that pushes this kind of individualism, all you have to do is, do some research on this subject, and that's you done. You've contributed your bit. You've fulfilled the societal contract. That also there's a potential that people who don't use that kind of analysis, like the bourgeois class, who are aware of the material reality of the world and are fine with liberalism as an ideology because it doesn't threaten them in any way, are fine with utilizing those people who will apply their social contract to mean, okay, well, I should use my degree to build drones and use my degree to build more efficient rockets and missiles and things.
Or better machines for drilling oil.
Yeah, exactly. So more efficient mining equipment, or more efficient fracking equipment, or you might be tasked as a mathematician to find the most optimal place to drill for oil, statistically and financially. And that sort of thing, while being an interesting project, and I'm sure you'll be paid very well for it, if you only consider it as far as I'm contributing to society via my degree, you forget the fact of how are people going to be forced to work on this project? How are people's lives taken into account? Why is environmental degradation not accounted for? Why is it considered some sort of negative externality? It's not. If you're just doing the maths on its own because society is individualistic, then there's no need to consider who might be seriously affected by your work.
Just going back to the science education, is there like a particular medium that you think would be an effective platform, or in what way should it be presented, and who should be targeted as well?
Yeah, no, I think that it has to be while people are still at school taking science. Teachers should use that opportunity to talk about the material effects of workers from each field. So if you say to your teacher, hey, I'm really quite interested in going into biology as a field of study, or neurobiology, or I'm really interested in going into chemicals, I'm really interested in going into animal testing. If that is something that is brought up to a teacher, then the teacher can sort of say, well, okay, have you considered... It's important for the teachers to have that conversation with students and say, okay, but that feeds in, these people are getting richer off the back of that. And have you considered that you might be hurting other people? You might be bringing down their wages because you're bringing out more efficient surveillance systems. And you might be like, this is all nice and everything, but have you considered that maybe your actions are hurting animals a lot more, or hurting people outside of the UK quite a lot? And this is important because X, Y, and Z. And then once you've got people thinking more sort of humanist, in a more humanist way, you can begin to introduce concepts like materialism, of saying, okay, well, it's not just your industry that you want to go in, whether that's chemistry, physics, psychology, whatever, that has an interest on, that has a sort of effect on production. It's all production that has an effect on humans. And actually there's a relationship between how things are produced and who produces them. And just, even if you only introduce it by the time someone gets to year 11, to give someone that guidance of saying there really is an underlying effect on society from how people work, who they work for, and what their work is doing, then those people will be more conscious, and they might think, hey, maybe I don't want to build drones for Lockheed Martin, because actually that's just furthering imperialism, and that actually seems like a bit of a bad idea. And hey, maybe I'd get paid a bit more if my boss wasn't taking, all of my surplus value that I produce. And therefore, maybe we should stop killing the whales too. That seems a bit bad. Hang on a minute, this whole system is wait a minute, it's corrupt the whole way through. How did this happen?
You seem to be implying, comrade, a certain general raising of the consciousness here.
Well, listen, if class consciousness is raised by this episode, then it's all good. Yeah. It's fine.
One of the main planks of eco-fascist politics, I would say, is the construction of immigrants as an invasionary species onto the body of the population, the country, the land. And we have seen in recent years quite a lot of academic studies and books written by academics that kind of present these fears in certain bad ways, I would say. Certain ways in which there is an implicit kind of almost agreement with these attitudes. And I wanted to ask, how legitimate are, how can we present these kind of obviously very real reactionary thinking without playing into the logic of that thinking?
I think it's probably a question of the language used in presenting science to the public, whether that's in articles in journals or in how these things are communicated via the news or via in newspapers or online sources or even podcasts about the news. For example, if you say that you have found a link between population of a country and the total plastic usage of a country in kilograms, or the population of a country and the amount of CO2 emitted per year per citizen in that country, or in the country as a whole, it's very easy to present that data without any underlying contextual analysis. And it's very easy for a journal to capitalize on the result and say, well, we need a very short article from you that summarizes these results as efficiently as possible. So you cut out all the context because it just isn't relevant to the actual discovery itself. The discovery itself is that there is a relation, and here's the statistical methods we use to confirm that, but not why this is true. There is no context underneath it. There is no, we found that African countries have a higher amount of, CO2 released or coal processed per human, and as the populations rise, this is increasing. But what you fail to mention is that where that coal is going and who is paying for that coal extraction, and it very often isn't the local people in those countries. It often isn't the people in the Congo paying for the extraction of natural resources from the Congo. It very often isn't the people in oil-rich countries, or at least the local workers in the oil-rich countries, paying for the extraction of oil.
The problem with the climate crisis, and I think concurrently eco-fascism, is it's happening on such a huge scale. It's very hard to keep everything in your head about just how fucked we are.
Yeah.
And there, I think eco-fascism can often play on that sense of scale. Do you think the breakdown in that kind of people's ability to, engage with the world at a certain, scale, leads to things like like conspiracy movements like the Flat Earth movement, or, you know, I guess also you could include things like the anti-vax conspiracy, things like this, these kind of like very marginal theories which are now gaining traction within a much wider kind of group of the part of the population.
Yeah, so this is going towards my pet hate of liberalism here, in the reduction of the individual to like the most important demographic in society. So people think that change has to occur at the individual level and that it will happen widespread by just disseminating the best thoughts in the free market of ideas. And for materialists, that's just not really true. Also, a lot of people really aren't involved in land-based projects at all, so they don't have the time. The culture is often quite exclusionary in that it's very white and very middle class, and they see it as kind of a waste of time because it can't be monetized, so it's not sort of useful for sustaining yourself. So nature's effectively been left to the hobbyists and the capitalists, unfortunately. But the adequate scale part is quite interesting because the adequate scale depends on who you talk to. So Maury Bookchin suggested with communalism that the neighborhood is the best size for engaging with nature, and that neighborhood socialism-ish, that's almost what it is the optimal, most sustainable form of socialist organization. And Abdullah Öcalan, for example, has revised this slightly, given it Kurdish characteristics, and it's working decently well in Rojava at the moment. Marxist-Leninists maybe would argue that the nation is the optimal scale for interacting with nature. They see like a nationally planned economy as being the only way to manage resources sustainably, although Mao didn't do very well with the sparrows, so maybe that's a little bit of a dead alley.
Oh my god, we've got all these locusts. Where did they come from?
Wait a minute.
Hey.
And eco-fascists hold the view, like Marxist-Leninists or Maoists or Stalinists, that central planning is key to effective resource management. However, they misunderstand why those resources aren't centrally or socially managed at the moment and are instead managed by these capitalist-like market forces instead. Some anarchists might argue that ecological sustainability can't come about via central planning and hierarchy, because A, they're opposed to hierarchy, and B, there will always be like a little bit of a presence of some degree of oversight in the unnecessary like power structures. Therefore, they'll probably argue that like horizontal organization is the best because it allows people to be closest to the earth and so live sustainably. And deep ecology is like the radical offshoot of that idea.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like, especially with the anarchist kind of sense of this, do you think like horizontalism is, or even like on the scale of neighborhood socialism, is an adequate response to like the global catastrophe that we're facing? I mean, this is obviously this is a kind of a Zizek argument, which is this is such a big problem that only like national or global solutions are the answer.
I'm not handing off my autonomy to a multinational organization at the moment. The minute we have some revolution, I might think twice about that. But until governments can be proved to be sustainable and effective with managing resources, I don't think anyone other than eco-fascists would have comfort in assigning resource management to a supranational organization, other than maybe neoliberals, because they're quite happy to do it with things like the EU or NATO or NAFTA. Maybe the issue isn't eco-fascisms, it's eco-neolibs.
Just thinking about a state response or a national scale to combat climate crisis.
Yeah.
Extinction Rebellion have made their organisation explicitly about petitioning the state to do more about climate change, to cut emissions by this certain date, to be the benevolent kind of figure, patriarchal figure that comes in and sorts out the problems. If only the Tories would listen to the well-meaning people who are blocking the roads, this will all be solved. In addition, XR have got quite a lot of blowback for keeping within their movement some fairly kind of eco-fascist reactionary figures. And they've also been criticised for not having, for lacking any kind of like systematic critique in their politics, and also not being explicitly anti-fascist. What effect does XR, these kind of apolitical what effect does XR have on the environmental movement? How much energy are they taking up? And how much is it having an effect on the more direct action-based groups? And how is Extinction Rebellion's anti-fascist attitude and unpolitical attitude, what effect is that having on other left movements in the UK?
XR have taken a lot of the activist space with them. They are at every protest, they have their own protests, they do their own direct action, and they obviously are good at mobilizing people. But the danger of mobilizing a lot of people is populism, because you can't appeal to a mass of people with very sort of diverging worldviews without appealing to some sort of populist thing that they all have in common. It's very easy for them to claim to be apolitical because they don't intend to tackle political issues, but being apolitical means that you can be co-opted by genuine populists and genuine fascists within the movement, simply because you've already set the framework up. If you've already set up sort of strange quasi-hierarchical systems in order to distribute orders to activists, and you've got rules laid out, and you've specifically disavowed things like masking up or carrying tools of any kind, or you encourage talking to the police, then you already have a system that's very well set up to be co-opted by someone who wants to use that system to talk to the most people possible and let them know about the benefits of National Socialism. Because as long as you don't term it like that and you talk about it's controversial, but like the neo-paganist aspects of things, and you say, no, you guys, we're trying to get in touch with the land too, and you distribute that message to a lot of people who are out on the streets think that they're doing something serious, and you don't have a critique of the state as well, and in fact your movement is talking directly to the state to say, we would like some reforms, we would like some changes, please, that's all we're doing this for. It's very easy for someone then to say, okay, I too would like to stop global warming, and I too would like to stop the climate catastrophe, and I too would like to work with the state. I'm on board with you. I'm here. I also believe that all of us as one, failing to mention they mean one country or one race, should be together and help to take direct action against the people that are doing this, again, failing to mention who is doing this. And as long as you remain apolitical, you just let yourselves be co-opted by these people. You say, well, that's fine because we don't have a critique of the state. So sure, are you guys, we're trying to work with the state here. We're trying to work with the police, well-known haters of fascists. If you're trying to work with the police and the state, then it's very easy for someone who wants to be the police and the state to work with your movement. So there is no anti-fascism within XR. And yes, local groups have taken some action towards it, but it makes it very difficult for people trying to be in the activist space to take meaningful anti-fascist green actions, because you might be accosted by someone who's ostensibly protecting the peace of the movement, but is actually, by stopping you from carrying out some sort of action, in fact helping the police or helping the state in their continual repression of the movement. And standing there and going, we don't know why the state hasn't cooperated yet, because you have no materialist understanding of why the state occurs, why it exists in the first place, and how it maintains its power and monopoly over violence over the individuals of a country or the nation that it's ostensibly serving, you will play into its hands. At a protest recently, some comrades were shouted at and verbally abused by some of the people there protesting with Extinction Rebellion for, quote, making it violent. In as far as they were masked up, they were aware of state surveillance, there were a very large number of police body cameras around, and those comrades were attempting to make a point about how the state bends to the will of the people who control the economy, and the people who control the economy have absolutely no regard whatsoever for the environment. And those people were being shouted at and accused of, you're making this protest violent, because these people who have been raised in a liberal country have the disillusion that you can be apolitical and you can completely ignore any sort of analysis. As long as you're peaceful, people will listen to you. People will hear your ideas and think that, yes, we should save the planet. But if you fail to critique why we haven't currently saved the planet yet, and you fail to understand why certain other methods maybe haven't worked in the past and have led to groups like Earth First, or, for example, Deep Green Resistance, suffering from the presence of TERFs within your movement, or fascists within your movement, or just people who identify as some weird form of, Pentilinkula-esque, following some esoteric form of fascism or some esoteric third positionism within your movement. If you fail to understand where that comes from, you're doomed to repeat those exact same mistakes again. And the worst part is that you're then endangering a significant number of people. And as long as your main demographic is middle class and white, that's, I guess, fine if they're laying their lives down very heroically. It's a bit of a savior complex, but like if they're getting arrested, it's no skin off their back. But the real danger lies in the working class people who will be affected by this, because they won't be able to get a job at their father's company after the action has taken place. The minute you have an arrest on your record, the minute you have a prison sentence on your police record, you're fucked for trying to find a job from that point on. If you don't have any other, if you rely on being a worker, working with the state, in as far as the state is a bourgeois state, and allowing yourself to be prosecuted can never be good for you. And if you're a person of color, you're more likely to be violently oppressed by the state.
We see this thing that you're talking about just this couple of weeks,
Yeah.
With the Extinction Rebellion London Collective having a protest outside the Royal Courts of Justice, saying, why are you prosecuting all of us 1,000 people for standing a road? Shouldn't you be focusing on prosecuting knife crime? And, great, throw a bunch of young black men under the bus because you don't want to get a fine for standing in a road. This is just one example of many kind of things.
If you're willing to accept what's happening and that's the natural order of things, and you're only confused by the fact that the police aren't arresting enough people of color to keep your movement going, then maybe you don't understand why the police are there in the first place, and maybe you're doomed to work with them, and maybe the work you're doing is strengthening a racial bias within the police and the militarized bourgeois state, and maybe that's not a good thing if you're trying to avoid fascism.
And on that note, thank you for coming and doing another episode with us. Where can we find out about the Green Anti-Capitalist Front?
You can find out about the Green Anti-Capitalist Front on our Twitter page, which is @FrontGreen. You can find out about us on our website, which is greenanticapitalist.org. All one word. Yeah, and we have a Facebook page as well, and various regional groups.
If you like this episode and you want to support us, as I said before, Patreon us, review us, rate us, retweet us, favour us, recommend us, big us up, do our promotional work for us, all that kind of stuff. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
You're listening to Dissident Island Radio.
Live every first and third Friday of the month at 9 p.m. GMT.
Check out www.dissidentisland.org for downloads and more.